December 1st, 1942, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Before the sun had fully risen over the battered American outpost codenamed Cactus, the Boeing B-17 flying fortress Omar Khayyam. The Plastered Bastard rumbled down the crude oil-lit runway, gathering speed as its crew braced for a long morning over enemy territory. The primitive strip, still ringed with coconut trees and bordered by burning oil wick markers, had become the beating heart of the struggle for the Solomon Islands. Captain Willis Jacobs guided the bomber into the dim sky with Lieutenant Stanley Summers at his side, flanked by Navigator Lieutenant William Jakimozik and Bombardier Lieutenant Clarence Johnson. Behind them worked Engineer Sergeant Delos Tuffy, gunners Corporal Claire Grover, Corporal Ray Lindemood, and Corporal Joseph Hartman, radio operator Sergeant Kino Hamalainen, and his assistant, PFC Arthur Lamar, along with a Navy photographer assigned to capture the enemy-held Bougainville coastline. At 5:30 a.m., the big bomber lifted into the humid Pacific air, beginning a routine reconnaissance run that none aboard could know would soon turn into catastrophe. Their squadron, the 431st of the 11th Bomb Group, had been in continuous combat for months, sustaining the Marine foothold on Guadalcanal. The fall of the island would sever supply lines to Australia and New Zealand and restore Japanese dominance across the Pacific. The flying fortresses that reached Cactus had already flown thousands of miles from Hawaii, staging through lonely specks of coral like Palmyra, Christmas Island, Canton, and Fiji before reaching Roses and Buttons, small pieces of ground turned into lifelines of survival. Their B-17s had been repaired in tight revetments where ground crewmen guided wingtips past trees, where jeeps acted as runway lights, and where even generals had once worked bucket brigades for 20 straight hours to refuel planes in driving storms. Every mission was improvised, dangerous, and vital. As Jacobs's crew settled into their long northward flight, the vast distances of the Pacific and the crude airfields below told the story of a campaign run at the edge of exhaustion. The Japanese, stunned by the initial American landing on Guadalcanal, had been forced to shift air operations back to Rabaul. But by October, they had carved out a forward base at Boeing on the southeastern edge of Bougainville, allowing Mitsubishi Zero fighters to stage closer and ambush American reconnaissance planes like the Plastered Bastard. For most of the outbound flight, the air was quiet, the ocean a glassy sheet below. Jacobs completed the reconnaissance run without incident and began the return flight, cruising at 17,000 feet near Bougainville's southern edge. The calm ended abruptly when 6 Zeros dove in from above and behind. Grover in the ball turret opened fire first, his guns vibrating through the frame of the bomber. Lindemood in the waist followed, and Hartman in the tail tracked the twisting fighters. 2 Zeros ignited, spiraling downward in long arcs that vanished into the sea miles below. The remaining fighters broke off and disappeared toward their staging base, leaving the B-17 remarkably untouched. Jacobs turned east toward Choiseul Island, unaware that the most dangerous attack was still ahead. As the coastline neared, another group of 6 Zeros slashed into view, their engines howling as they descended. The crew manned their guns again, but before they could fully react, a 7th fighter burst out of the clouds, charging head-on toward the cockpit like a streak of silver. The Japanese pilot dropped 4 small aerial bombs that tumbled past harmlessly, but he kept coming, committed to a suicidal ramming attack. The closing speed left Jacobs no time to maneuver. Moments later, the Zero tore into the top of the B-17 just behind the radio compartment. Flames erupted instantly, and the bomber sheared apart. The forward section and the fighter locked in a burning embrace as they fell toward the sea, while the severed tail, still intact, began to roll gently, as though gliding. In that detached tail, Corporal Joseph Hartman drifted in and out of consciousness, unaware at first that he alone remained alive in the shattered fragment of the flying fortress. The roar of engines he had always taken comfort in had vanished, replaced by the shriek of air ripping through the exposed fuselage. As gravity pulled the tail downward, instinct jolted him awake. He groped for his parachute straps, staggered to the rear hatch, and forced it open against the violent wind. The moment he pushed himself free, the tail spun away below him. Hartman yanked the ripcord, but the straps had not been tightened, and the sudden force knocked him out again. Only 2,000 feet of sky remained between him and the ocean. He regained awareness, drifting under the canopy, descending toward the water off Choiseul. As the waves rose to meet him, he slipped from the harness and plunged into the sea, beginning a desperate swim toward the distant shore nearly 2 football fields away. When he finally staggered into the shallows, he realized that his clothes had been stripped away during the fall. 2 dark-skinned islanders approached cautiously, having watched the strange descent of what they called a koluka baku, a boat that flies. They spoke enough English to reassure him and soon guided him into a small open boat and paddled toward their village of Polo on the island's northwestern coast. There, the village leader offered him simple clothing and treatment for his head wounds, injuries Hartman scarcely remembered receiving. For a week, he remained in Polo as a native courier trekked north toward a hidden ridge where an Australian coastwatcher monitored the Bougainville Strait in secrecy. These coastwatchers, operating far behind enemy lines, were a critical lifeline for American forces, radioing reports of Japanese aircraft and ships that saved countless lives. When the courier returned, Hartman followed the island guides deep into the jungle. The path cut through steep, muddy hillsides, and every step punished his bare feet, the cuts worsening as they ascended toward the ridge. His shoes had been lost either in the midair chaos or the swim to shore. After 3 days of exhausting travel, he reached the hidden lookout, where the coastwatcher confirmed that Japanese troops were only a few miles away. For weeks, the 2 men remained concealed, shifting position whenever natives warned of enemy patrols. Hartman lived among the people of Choiseul for 6 long weeks, hunted and fished with them, tasted local fruits and vegetables, and ate fish, birds, and the island's fruit bats, the papauku. Nights brought the eerie chorus of insects, the screech of bats, and the unsettling sense that the jungle itself breathed around him. Curious villagers visited often, drawn to the stranded airmen who had fallen from the sky. His island refuge was disturbed only once by the enemy, when natives escorted a downed Japanese pilot into the village. Both aviators, enemies in the air, found themselves in a strange, quiet confrontation on the ground. The Japanese pilot, having been tricked into wasting his pistol ammunition shooting at birds, was taken to the coastwatcher. Squadron records later noted that what followed was an informal and one-sided trial that ended in the pilot's execution. For the islanders, the death created opportunity. They stripped the body for clothing, shoes, and anything of use. When the Japanese eventually withdrew from Choiseul, villagers marked the moment with a mock hunt in which men dressed as Japanese soldiers clutched blank-firing rifles and play-acted their own demise with theatrical convulsions, while the others rushed in to loot their bodies, mimicking the real scavenging that accompanied battlefield survival in the Solomons. As the weeks passed, Hartman's longing to return to his squadron only grew. The natives devised a plan to take him south along the slot, New Georgia Sound, where Japanese destroyers and submarines raced by night in the deadly supply runs the Americans called the Tokyo Express. His escort would depart under a waxing moon, keeping close to the silhouettes of dark islands, moving silently in a rough-hewn canoe. On January 13, 1943, 21 paddlers pushed off from Sasamunga, beginning a covert journey past abandoned Japanese barges, shattered boat hulls, and the unmarked graves of previous skirmishes. At one point, as they skirted Santa Isabel Island, the searchlights of a Japanese warship swept across the sound. Hartman watched the bright beams dance over the water, each pass threatening to expose them. 12 nights of tension and 225 miles of travel had brought them this far. One flare of light could end everything. But the ship moved on without detecting them. They remained on Santa Isabel for 8 days, waiting for what seemed a safer moment to cross the open water toward Florida Island. During this pause, the natives discovered an abandoned Japanese motor launch still in working order. To Hartman's surprise, they started the engine effortlessly and piloted the craft with steady hands, carrying him south toward Tulagi. In the approaches to the island, an American PT boat intercepted the launch. Hartman was pulled aboard and for the first time in 2 months stood among fellow Americans. The next morning, he boarded a B-17 bound for Buttons, Espiritu Santo, arriving on February 2, 1943, ending a 63-day odyssey that had begun in fire at 17,000 feet. Hartman returned not to celebration, but to the quiet realization that he alone survived from the 11 men who had taken off with him at dawn on December 1st. The Pacific had swallowed the others without a trace. His survival had depended on instinct, luck, the courage of strangers, and the fragile thread of trust that connected him to people whose world had been changed forever by the war passing over their islands. As he stepped back onto familiar ground, the cost of the mission hung over him like the echo of distant engines, an unspoken reminder of how swiftly life could be torn away in the vastness of the Pacific.